Sebastian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm glad we could do this.
Okay, so let's start with something spicy.
hmm
What do you think most people get wrong about the SAT?
I think the biggest thing most people get wrong is they try to cram in as many questions as possible in terms of studying. Like they try to do 500 questions or something, or they try to do this and they try to do it quickly. Like I'm going to do 3 hours and try to do as many questions as I can in 3 hours instead of like slowing down and thinking more about each question. So I think in prep, that's probably the biggest mistake. And I think just the general ideas people have about the SAT is that it has to do with how smart you are, or it has to do with like it's a very hard test that only smart people do well on. It's not really about that. It's about learning the test. And then once you learn it, anyone can do decently well on it.
Yeah, I definitely get that. From my experience, it's supposed to test your uh, IQ, some sort. Used to be, I think. But I feel like nowadays it's pretty easy to cram it. But most people just mix up cramming with like actual studying, studying. So
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like maybe at one point in the beginning, they thought it was going to be about being about intelligence or something. But really now, especially with the new version, it's about do you obviously have you need to have some sort of base knowledge, right? Like a good vocabulary helps, math skills help, but then do you understand how the question is asking questions or how the test is asking questions, and do you understand how to use answer choices, and can you practice the strategy, right? It's just like any other test that you can practice. It's not like this abstract thing that is testing your actual mental powers or anything.
yeah, definitely. So in the US, which session would you say the students struggle more? The reading, writing, or the math session?
Well, definitely the time I spend the most with students is the math section. Not even that they struggle more with it, like the scores are lower, but they feel like they can crack it more and they feel more confused about the equations or things like that. So it feels more like you can study for it. And I think some people have the wrong notion that like the verbal section is just sort of like maybe you can study for the grammar and then maybe you can improve your vocabulary, but everything else is just sort of can you read well? And it's not really about being a good reader as much as it is about like reading these short passages and breaking things down. So that obviously helps to be a good reader, but I think I definitely spend more time on the math section because there's so much content there, like geometry, algebra, quadratic equations. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's the complete reverse actually. For most of my students, people actually struggle with the verbal section more because English is not their first language.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, because you have international students more. So most of I think 95% of my students are all in the US,
Um,
and probably 85% of those are like English is their native language and probably the only language they know. So it helps them in the verbal section a bit compared to international students. And what I've noticed with international students is usually the math is really strong compared to the kids in the US.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We okay. I hope you don't get offended by this, but we kind of make fun of the U.S. kids a lot
hmm
because the SAT, those kind of math is really only our secondary school math. So
hmm
people
hmm
and people, you know how the Asian stereotypes be. If you don't get 800, you might as well not take the SAT.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've noticed like I had a kid who was like looking at my YouTube videos and stuff, and he was from Bangladesh, and all the math was so easy for him. And it was just like the vocabulary and the grammar that was really throwing him off. And he was like not even going to be taking the SAT until like a year or two from now. But he was just
Oh,
the math there was so much more advanced than what most kids are doing here, it seems like.
yeah, I feel like the only part where they struggle for the math part here is that
hmm
there's a few words that they never encountered before, like perpendicular.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
probably the,
Yeah. And
yeah,
yeah, the
probably the easy.
vocabulary, and sometimes you just have to get used to the way, I think for everyone, the way the SAT words questions, like I'll have kids who are really good at geometry or something, right? and they will have heard perpendicular, but maybe they won't have seen this question that's sort of blending geometry with algebra or doing this other thing, and then they have to like get used to this type of wording. But once they do, it's usually pretty good, yeah. Because I think there's kids who are strong with the foundations of math, but they struggle with the SAT portion of it, and then there are kids who are just like actually need help with the actual math foundations too.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and as well as Outlier Prep?
Yeah, so I have been a full-time tutor now for I think like 11 years. And I'm in Brooklyn. I tutor mostly in Manhattan and the Upper West Side. And now, since COVID, I've been doing a lot of remote tutoring. And it covers, I've done homeschool teaching, I've done essay help, I've done math and science. You know, in the US, there's like the AP tests. I don't know if that's in Finland or Vietnam or, but like we'll do, you know, this AP chemistry, which you can take this test to sort of prove your chemistry knowledge or physics and so on. So I've done all that stuff. And then obviously the SAT has always been sort of a consistent part of my tutoring as well. And so I launched this tutoring company with a friend of mine who's also a tutor. And we've been doing tutoring specifically focused on standardized tests. And as an extension of that, and really sort of one of my main focuses right now is this YouTube channel, which is Outlier Learning, where I'm producing like content for SAT and math and just sort of general education stuff. But primarily SAT right now, that is focused on, you know, trying to help students get an education without having to pay money. And like, you know, I'm trying to make a very thorough, comprehensive sort of review guide for the SAT that anyone could watch, right? As long as you have access to the internet and a computer, then you should be able to watch these videos and sort of learn the SAT.
Yeah, that's very nice. I saw the College Bar has been, ever since they switched to digital SAT, they've been collaborating with the Khan Academy, and they also released a question bank. So probably to like bridge the gap. I guess test prep over there costs a lot, as I've heard.
Yeah, test prep's expensive, and I think that's been maybe the best thing about the new SAT is this question bank and the Khan Academy collaboration, because it makes it so much easier for kids to study on their own. So obviously, I like when people have me as a tutor. That's great, but I would really like it to be where anyone, if you have your own like drive and your own motivation, you can learn it on your own. So Khan Academy has been great, and I often recommend that. And the question bank and the Blue Book tests are also really good. So those are sort of the resources that are sort of new to the SAT. I think in the past you basically had to buy a book and probably get a tutor. And now still getting a tutor can be very helpful, but there are more free options than ever before.
Yeah. I think back in the days, the SAT, the College Board also sell their own test prep books. So after they check out, they would also pitch their books. I don't know. It feels a bit scummy for a non-profit organization.
Yeah, it's interesting how they work. Yeah, because they would obviously you have to buy the tests, then they would have these books, and then you have to pay, I think, to get the test sent to schools. So, and they have like things that help people low income, at least in the US, to not have to pay that, but it's still a hassle, and it's still the cheaper it can be, the better it'll be for everyone, obviously. And
you can send your test score for free. I think a few days before you take the test, not a few days before after you take the test. But you only know your score 13 days after you take the test. So before you send it to the school, which is, I don't know, everything's a bit
that's a tricky situation. Yeah, it's interesting.
Back in 2023, it was my last chance to took the SAT, so I have to send that score either way. So it works out.
Okay.
Yeah, it works out perfectly for me. But I can see how it can be a little bit awkward.
Yeah, if it's like your first test and you're not sure if you're going to take it again or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So aside from Khan Academy and the question bank, are there any? Oh, and also your YouTube channel, of course. Are there any like SAT prep resources that you want to recommend or you find like extremely helpful for people?
Those are the free ones, I think, that I recommend. Honestly, I think Reddit The SAT Reddit is pretty good for finding free resources as well. People are always helping each other out there. I've used one that's a little pricey, but it's called Test Innovators. They have a whole bunch of stuff for a whole bunch of tests. And they have, if you wanted more practice, you could take their test there. But I think that would really be like a secondary thing. You want to be using the Blue Book and you want to be using the College Board Question Bank. There's also other YouTube channels that are really good, like Tutorlini is really popular, and I think he does really good math stuff. And JW Math Tutoring is also a good YouTube channel that produces a lot of good math content. Mine has been mostly focused on math just because there's so much content, but there is some verbal stuff on there, and there'll be more verbal stuff in the future because there doesn't seem to be that much verbal stuff on the YouTube world, and I'd like to sort of fill that hole. And then there's websites that are sort of popping up. There's one called like Chat SAT that is kind of new and interesting, and I think those are the main ones.
Yeah, I was invited to the Reddit channel actually.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's get a bit more into your Outlier Prep. So can you provide us like an overview of how your methods work?
Yeah, so with tutoring, I've done classes before where it's a small like Zoom class, and that makes it more affordable because there could be more kids and they're sort of splitting the cost between themselves. And we sort of go, maybe a 2-hour session, we'll do an hour of math, hour verbal, and we try to go through every topic. And then after a few sessions, you would start doing practice tests and see how your growth goes. But most of my tutoring is one-on-one tutoring. And in one-on-one tutoring, it sort of depends on the student, but I usually have them take a Blue Book test first. We review their mistakes. And then one thing I recommend for everyone is to have like a notebook of mistakes. And you sort of mark down like, I missed this question. Like, let's say you miss question 20 on Blue Book test 4. Math module 2B or something, right? Like the harder math module, you would mark down like, I missed this question. Then you could then you write out the work, maybe how you write down like what your mistake was. Like, I forgot the formula for sphere or something, even though they give you that, but I forgot this thing. And then you show the work properly. And that just helps you remember that mistake. So in the future, if you come up with the same type of question, you should feel more confident and remember it. And often I'll have them have this notebook, and then right before they take the next practice test, to read through their notebook to refresh their memory on what they forgot before. So that's a big part of it. And then I'm going through for the YouTube channel, the Blue Book, or not the Blue Book, the College Board Question Bank has it broken down into categories, right? So you can go into advanced math, and within advanced math, you have like nonlinear functions. You have, what else do you have in it? Equations of 1 or 2 or more variables. And you have equivalent expressions, right? So you can already get a kind of broad sense of what the questions are, but then I'm going through each of those question banks and grouping questions together. So I just finished making a video on probability and conditional probability. And I think in the question bank, there's around 40 questions. And then I've grouped those questions into 21 types. So if you learn those 21 types, then you should know every type of question you would ever get on the College Board on a Blue Book involving probability. And I'm trying to encourage students to sort of see these as types so they can see connections across questions and understand like what is making a question hard and what makes the question easy, right? Because sometimes there's a question that feels easy, but it's actually hard. And it's like, why is it hard? It might be that the answer choices are kind of confusing. It might be that the wording, a classic is like, they'll say there are a very simple version, but like there are 5 pigs and 12 elephants, or there are 5 pigs out of 17 animals. How many are not pigs, or something like that? What's the probability of choosing not a pig? And like the not, something that people will miss, and they'll just say 5 out of 17. So I'm just trying to get through this for people to see the connections. And I'm always trying to encourage people to see like the trends and patterns in the SAT. Because once you have that, it will really simplify your work a lot.
I don't think it's that much of a problem now as compared to the new SAT. The word problems in the new SAT was the paper one was
Hmm.
way worse, I would say.
Yeah, I think they used to be more words. Like I think the questions used to be longer, and especially in the reading passages, right? I think that's a great thing
Yeah,
now is that each reading passage is just a paragraph or two, and it's each for just one or two. Sometimes there's questions that are, I don't know, I think it's each just for one question, and that just makes it a lot easier, but it still is a good test. I think, yeah. So it's been good so far.
yeah. So what's like one because back in Vietnam, people always the default option is actually to go to a test center, go to a like a cram school with like 200 people into in one class. They would teachers would give them questions and also teach them. Yeah, just like normally. Although I don't think they go as deep and as personalized because there's 200 people in one class, of course. And I kind of hate how that's a default option, but of course it depends on the culture. So, is there any like tips for students that you want to provide for choosing the right SAT prep resource?
Yeah, I mean, I think you should be aware of, well, there's a lot of free resources, right? Like we talked about, and low cost options like websites. I think your website is an interesting one, and they're like the ones I mentioned as well. And then for actual tutoring, which is always going to be basically more expensive because it's like an actual person's time, right? I think classes are a great place to start because they're more affordable and you could have, I mean, I think the ideal and what we would do sometimes is we'd have office hours. So it's like you have the class with a bunch of people and then you come to office hours and get like a little bit of one-on-one time if you need it to ask extra questions. Yeah, I think when you're trying to pick something, it's about you have to understand yourself, right? Like some kids are they don't want to ask questions, they don't really want to participate too much. They want to sit and listen and sort of just work through it. And then a big class can sort of help you with that. But for a lot of people, it is good to have personalized learning. And I would just be aware too. I would be wary of anyone who's trying to sell you on a lot of hours. Like for one-on-one tutoring, I think after maybe 20 hours or something, it really the like benefit starts going down and down per hour because
Okay.
it shouldn't be so many hours spent there. If you have to keep going and going, there's probably something missing. Either what's happened with me, honestly, when it's we keep going and going and we're not getting through it a lot, is like the student's not doing the homework. So you have to do the work on your own, and then the tutoring you have to view as like a supplement for that. And if anyone comes to you immediately and is like, you need to come and do 50 hours with me, they're probably just trying to sell you a lot of hours that you probably don't need.
Yeah. Yes, I noticed you put a lot of emphasis on making the test prep journey fun as well and not just effective.
Yeah, I think right now, AI is coming up in education, and a lot of people are saying like AI is not going to work or it's not going to be good because it kind of right now I think there's still holes in it. It's still learning, and I don't think the issue eventually will be that the AI can't teach you, say, the formula for volume of a cone or something, or it can't teach you the math. But sitting there on it with like an AI thing is not very personable and it's not like it's fun. And if it's not fun, some people are great. They have this great motivation and they can just power through it. But a lot of people will get a lot more out of it if it is fun. And one thing I've recommended to people in my videos and stuff is to take what they learn in my video and try to teach it to someone else. Because then that sort of spreads the knowledge and it's also more fun. And just doing study groups, is a great idea where it's free. You and maybe a couple friends. If you're in person, you go to a library, you each take a practice test, then you review and you try to help each other out. I think that socializing is really helpful and just makes it more enjoyable, right? You don't have to you shouldn't have to hate studying. Like studying can be kind of a fun thing to do if you do it right. And if you can't do it in person, you can find someone online and do it like that and just sort of have this connection. So you're not just this like person alone studying, being miserable, trying to learn this stuff. It can be a social activity in a way.
Yeah. Also, when you try to explain something to another, you must be able to understand it yourself. So it also helps with that.
Exactly. And they'll ask questions maybe that you didn't think of. And like, I mean, I've become a lot better. I was pretty good at SAT before I started tutoring, but now I'm like much better at it because I'm always having to explain it over and over again to every new student, right? And it just becomes like I can look at questions and before even finishing reading the question now, I know what the question's asking basically. And I know like what type of question it is. And you don't need to get to that level to do really well, but I'm just saying that comes from teaching it to a whole bunch of people. And if you just teach it to a couple friends, that'll help you a lot.
Yeah, that's what I noticed myself as well. So, okay, weirdly enough, do you think because I have to design questions myself, and
Hmm.
when I design it, I have to make sure that like this, I have the same mindset as the one who made the actual questions. In a weird way, if you make your student put your students into their shoes and try to make out a question themselves, do you think that would work?
I've tried that a couple times. Yeah. And I think for high level students, it does work. It's hard though, because when I ask them to make a question, it kind of throws them off. Like they don't know exactly how to do it. But yeah, making your own question would be great. And then trying to solve it and making sure. And that would really show that you understand both sides of it, right? And the whole picture of it. So yeah, I think that's a great strategy.
Yeah, just thinking like we have how do you balance between having the prep fun while also guaranteeing that they're still studying something and they're still like is there a quota? Yeah, you said you kind of don't like people cramming like 500 questions in 3 hours, but is there still like a minimum numbers that they should do every week or every day?
Well, yeah, it's hard to say number of questions because like the high level scores, right? We'll get through the easy and medium questions really quickly. So they could do a lot of those. But if you're high level, you should just be focusing on the hard questions anyway.
Yeah.
And then it's really more about time, I think. Like if you can dedicate 15 minutes a day and then some days do 2 or 3 hours and actually be dedicated to it, where like, now with phones and the internet, it's so hard to focus for like 2 hours at a time. But like, let's say you go in and you're like, for 30 minutes, I'm going to do these questions. And you don't say 30 minutes, 30 questions. You say 30 minutes, maybe 12 questions, or 30 minutes, 10 questions. And then maybe I'll look at my phone for 5 minutes or something. And then I'll go back. And then I think that will help. So you still want to spend time doing it. I just worry about trying to do as many questions as possible. And what happens with my students is with students in general is they're trying to do so many questions that when they miss a question, they don't actually spend time reviewing it, right? So like, let's say you do 20 questions, right? And you get 18 out of 20 right. So 18 of those questions, you just move on with your life. Maybe they took you 2 minutes each or a minute each. But then the two questions that you miss, maybe you want to spend 10 minutes reviewing each of those questions or 6 minutes reviewing each of those questions. And that will really help you get the most out of your time instead of just doing, oh, I missed those two questions, I'm going to keep going and not really review. And like, oh, this is how, like, I think some people will review them by looking at how the College Board tells you to do it or looking at a video and then moving on. But when you miss a question, you should try, like what you said, you could make up a new question of it. Try to find other questions of that type and do maybe 3 or 4 of those questions. And then you can move on to new stuff.
Okay. It's funny how you mentioned like, okay, I'm gonna do 30 minutes of prep and then I'm gonna use my phone for 5 minutes, because there's a meme back in Vietnam that usually when you do that you start gaming until 2 a.m. instead.
Yeah, no, it's tricky. Yeah, I would prefer my students to do like 3 hours or whatever and not look at their phones at all. But in a realistic world, it's kind of hard. Like people look at their phones after a bit of time. But you should be setting timers for yourself and not just doing it based off of feeling, right? Like set a timer, 30 minutes work, set a timer, 5 minutes, take a break. And ideally, you could do more than 30 minutes straight, but that could be a good starting point.
I just talked to this one student. I hope he's not watching this, but he told me when he was practicing on Blue Book, he constantly get 1550. But then the day before the exam, he stay up and play video games too much, so his eye hurts on
Oh,
the
no.
actual test exam. So he only got 1460. Well, only.
Yeah, that's still good, but that would be frustrating, yeah, to go down
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, it's interesting. the way students take tests, because I have students who will score. I think most people score around what they get on their practice tests. You know, like if you're getting around 1400 on a practice test, you'll probably get between a 1350 or like 1340 and 1460 or something, right? But there are kids who like get so stressed out on test day that their score just drops, and I'll have people who like score consistently like 1300, and then on the test day they get an 1150 or something, which is kind of disappointing. And then I have the opposite sometimes. It's rare, but I have kids who like, you know, they're not taking studying as seriously, and maybe when they take their practice tests, they're not as focused as they could be. So they're getting like 1250, and then on the day of the test, they'll get like a 1400. So it's interesting how people respond to the actual test day. Most people score around what they get on the blue books. I think there's a lot of people complaining about the blue books being too easy and like not being accurate to the test. And I think that's a little true, but I think at the end of the day, I've noticed the scores are pretty close to what you actually get on the test.
I think it's definitely true. Around a year ago, they were because they were still tweaking the actual test itself.
Hmm.
So that's why they recently removed practice test 1 to 3 things because to make it somewhat harder.
Yeah, yeah. I think those tests were probably a little too easy. I think honestly, they probably didn't know people were gonna. I think the study materials have made people study more, and they're doing better than the College Board people expected. So they've had to amp up the difficulty on the tests because yeah, people are scoring higher. In the ideal world of the blue book, or not a blue book, of College Board, right? The average score would be around between 1,000 and 1,050. And for math, it'd be around 500. English would be around 500. And I think that the average has been closer to 1,100 with the new test, maybe even higher. I'm not exactly sure. So now they're trying to make the test harder to sort of balance it out again. And I think one issue too is that the test is shorter. And I think that helps a lot of people's focus. Like they don't burn out as much. And I don't think Blue Book or College Board took that into account as much. And I think the test should be longer, actually. I think that would help people not feel as much pressure. Because right now, if you miss a couple questions, your score can really take a big hit. If it was a little longer in each section, a few more questions, I think that would help sort of get the scores to be more balanced.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it because from my experience, I find the question, the test, it's a bit too long because I'm someone who is good at math, but
Hmm.
still, after 54 questions of verbal, there's something called like decision uh, deficiency or something. But yeah,
Hmm.
after you make so many decisions, you start to like getting worse at making decisions. Yeah, so after
Yeah.
those 54 questions verbal, I can mess up a few math questions that are so easy that I would never get it wrong.
Yeah, they
But
kind of burn you out, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting too that verbal always goes first. I think it'd be kind of fun if they let you choose which one you wanted to do first. But
that would be fun.
yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing. But yeah. Yeah, and I think verbal, maybe 27 questions for verbals, pretty good. The math just to me feels so short, the 22 questions, because I feel like my students get so stressed because they'll miss a couple questions and then it really hampers their score.
Yeah,
But
definitely. And there's usually I notice, at least for the practice test, there's usually like 2 to 3 wild card questions. They're
mhm,
It's not like they are hard because of the calculations, but it's just because they use a formula that they have never used before. And so
mhm.
those questions can most of the time cause me off guard. I have to learn this one vertex form of the like quadratic equations. I've never encountered that one before.
Yeah, that one, my students in the US, they usually learn it, but they learn it in like a day or two in Algebra 2 or something, and then they never really use it again. And then now they're learning it more. I think now teachers are teaching it more often. But yeah, a lot of them, that's one thing that they have to learn. And because they just totally forgot it after like the one day they learned it in high school. And that one, yeah, there's also like circle equation, right? That one, they don't use that often, like the formula for a circle in a coordinate plane. So it's interesting the things that the test emphasizes that is not really emphasized in high school math, at least in the US.
Yeah. So, well, what have you done to like counter the test day stress? because there's so many things that's different. And at least when I took the test, there's like an hour of bureaucratic stuff. Like I have to show them my ID. I have to like they have to pat me down. It's just a lot of
Mhm.
stuff that's make it extremely serious, even though it's just a test.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like it's getting more intense too. Well, one thing I always recommend is so I think, you're studying, and I think you should try to create a schedule, study every day. You maybe on weekdays, 15 minutes, on the weekends, an hour or two or a couple hours. And then obviously it could be longer when you're taking the actual practice tests. And then the week before the test, you should be studying a lot, like hours every day. Except I always tell my students not to study at all the day before the test. And they never like to hear that. Everyone wants to study the day before the test. And some people, like, if you haven't studied at all and you're only studying the last week of the test, okay, fine. I guess you need to study because you haven't really put the work in. But if you've been studying for a couple months or something, right? One more day of studying won't make that big of a difference. But if you can take the night off before the test, rest, have a good meal, maybe watch a movie and just sort of chill, try to go to sleep early, and just sort of get your mind like relaxed and ready to focus the next day, I think that's much more beneficial. So I think that's one way you can sort of combat the stress. I wish the tests were later in the day. Here, it's often so early in the morning, so kids are kind of rushed. But if it were, but yeah, try to wake up early, have some sort of breakfast or something, just to sort of go in feeling good, and then I think those are the best things to do. But definitely trying to take the day off before the test is really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's 8 a.m. Saturday or everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's 8 a.m. always. Yeah, and
So
that's
is there anything that they can actually do while doing the test that will calm them down? Is there any mantra or like
a
any thoughts?
mantra. Yeah, I think. hmm, I don't think I have told them anything for the actual test time. Yeah, to relax, but it's mostly just for before the test going in. And then I just try to remind them too that like the test is important. It's important about, getting into helping you get into certain schools, but it's not the whole package, right? Like your grades matter, your essays matter, your extracurriculars matter, and it's just part of it, right? It's not even the biggest part. Probably your grades are the most important part. And usually the students I have who stress out a lot are usually very good students, so they're going to get into a good school regardless. And it's just you want to do well, but you shouldn't feel like your whole life depends on this one test. So
Yeah.
that's usually what I tell them more than anything, to try to help them not stress out on the test day.
It's always like the argument like I can get to this one good school, but it's not number one. There's still better schools as well.
Yeah, and it's hard with the rankings because I think, just because the school's ranked better doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better for you. And, a lot of schools have great, it's like the name recognition is what people are after, but really you can get a really good education at a lot of universities, right? There's these people who are teaching you are professors, they have PhDs, they're usually respected in the field, and most of them are very serious. So I think a lot for college, it's about what you put into it, you get out of it. So when you go to a college, if you go to, say, a great university like an Ivy League or something, and then you just sort of hang out in your room, get C's, and just sort of scrape by, right? That's not getting that much out of it. And if you do that, but if you go to like a state school and you put all your effort in and join clubs and like write for the newspaper and maybe do work in labs, you're getting just as much or more than you would at other places.
Yeah, yeah, and also you mentioned like SAT scores not the only options or the only metrics.
Hmm.
Uh, I think it depends on the school. That's also one of the reasons why I did not want to apply to the US. It's because there's so many things to write. You have to get a recommendation letter, and
Yeah.
usually in Vietnam, we have to be the one who writes it and then translate it into Vietnamese for the teacher
Hmm.
to read. And then we have to, what else? There's the motivation letter and there's a bunch of essays as well.
Yeah, it's a lot. And it's expensive for international students. I don't know. Yeah, it seems like it's a lot of money here for the schooling. So it's tough, definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, I can see from and see that it's as a good thing for people who Microsoft one like just a number, a four letter, no, a number like 1,400 to define their entire personality.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want that to be the defining thing. And I think that's also why I emphasize that it's not actually telling you if you're smart or not, right? Like someone
Yeah.
who gets a bad score doesn't mean they're like dumb or something, but it's just about like, did you study? Did you put this material in? Do you sort of understand the way the test thinks? If you understand that, you'll probably do well. If you don't understand that, you probably won't do that well. But the test is not like the determining factor of success. Or
And there's also a lot of like test optional colleges popping up right now. They just ditch the standardized test entirely.
yeah, I don't actually know how I feel about test optional because it's making it people so stressed because now the only people who submit their scores are people who have like 1,500 and above. So you see these schools and their average SAT score is so high, but it's actually just because that doesn't mean most of the kids who go there actually got that score, right? Because a lot of kids just didn't submit a score at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at least in the US, I think the test does help sort of standardize across schools, right? Because some kids will have really good grades, and this test sort of helps you be standard across the board. Because like with essays we're talking about, right? Something that happens sometimes that I'm not happy about is like wealthier students will get like professionals to write their essays for them
Oh,
and stuff like that. And like obviously wealthier students are also the ones who are getting tutored and that helps. But at the end of the day, the person who's taking the test is the student. Whereas sometimes the essays can be written by someone else. And then also grading here, people get A's almost always, which doesn't make sense to me because I feel like an A should be something you earn, right? It should be something
yeah.
that only some people get, and that the majority of people should be maybe getting B's and C's, but parents wouldn't be happy with that. So there's a lot of pressure to give everyone like an A minus or something.
Yeah, and also uh, it's different in the US. You guys like scholarship is a thing. Well, more like tuition fee is a thing. You guys have to pay
Mhm.
tuition fee for higher education. That's why I've heard of stories like you are 22 years old, you just got your bachelor, and now you're a quarter million in debt, and that sounds extremely pressured.
Yeah, it's very stressful. And then it makes, when you go to school, like it makes you have to choose a major that you feel like will make you a lot of money. And I obviously, people go to college to get a good job, and that's totally fine. But I don't think it's only about getting a good job, right? It's about trying to get some sort of education, trying to expand your world perspective. And it's sad that our system is made so that for a lot of schools, for a lot of students, you graduate with this crazy debt, and then you have all this pressure to sort of try to pay that off. When if we had free college, right, or heavily subsidized universities, then people could go and be like, you know what, I'm going to major in this thing that maybe won't make me that much money, but I could get a decent job and I could learn this thing. But now it's like everyone is stressed out and they have to be really high earners to pay back this debt.
Yeah, it's also the case here in Finland. The job market is insane right now, especially for like programming jobs. I heard stories they're opening like a position and they're taking maybe three positions max, and
Hmm.
800 people applied. So
Yeah, it's crazy. And like there was a time, and it's still kind of true that programming is like very good career option, right? It's very stable, but I think it's changing with the development of new technology. It's just you don't want to be put in that position of having this huge debt. It's better. I would recommend for students, if you get into two schools that are both pretty good, if one of them, you're going to graduate and you'll have $200,000 of debt, and the other one, if you went, like, let's say you're going to a private school, right? And its tuition is $60,000 and you're going to graduate and you'd have 200 grand in debt or something. And another option is like a state school that maybe is a little bit lower ranked, but still well ranked and still well regarded. And you'd graduate with $50,000 of debt. That would probably be the better option for most people. It's just this like name recognition makes people forget about that. And they think I just have to go to the best school I can go to. Or when it might not even be the best school, it just has this better name for whatever reason.
like how many percentage of students would go from high school to and pursue higher education? Like how many percentage of them?
Like of my students or in general?
Yeah, both, I guess. Well, I guess your students it would be 100% because they are taking the SAT.
Well, yeah, of my SAT students, it's 100%. I tutor a lot of just high school students, but most of my students are like in private schools and they're going to like, yeah, they're sort of expected to go to college. So I think almost all my students have gone on to college straight out. Um, in the US, it's probably still less than half of students go straight to a four-year university. A lot of them go to community college, and I'm a big proponent of community college because I think, I don't know if they have that in Finland or Vietnam, but you go, most of them are just two-year programs. You get like the basics done. You sort of pick your major, figure out what you want to study, and then you apply to a four-year university. And it's usually much cheaper. Like in California, where I'm originally from, it's almost free. And then you go to those, then you go on to like a University of California, like a UC Berkeley or UCLA or any school, right? Like a Cal State Northridge or something. And then you finish your degree. And people have done that. You know, I have friends who did that, and then they went on to med school or they went on to pharmacy school. They went on to get like PhDs. So it's a great route for a lot of people. It's just not as common as I think it should be.
From what I've heard, people also look down on community college a lot.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. It is looked down on, but I think it's been getting better. And on the East Coast, like in New York, I hear of almost no one going to them, but in California, it's pretty common to go to them.
So like we have something similar. There's applied science in Finland, though tuition fee is probably not a problem because the government actually pays for it. And
yeah, that makes a huge difference. Yeah, if all universities were free here, then I think might as well go to a four-year if you can. But
yeah, so okay, well, which one would you prefer? Maybe the way it is now in the US, or maybe pay a little bit more tax. Everyone pay like 1 to 2% more, but then everyone gets free education.
I'm definitely for a little bit more tax, especially for. I don't think you need to tax like people who make less than the average more, but like you could tax people who make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year, 1 or 2% more, and it would totally take care of this system where you know who's really benefiting from it at the end of the day is not even the rich people benefit from it that much. Yeah, they're saving a little bit on taxes, but the people who really benefit are like the banks who get to take out these loans that they know are going to get paid back, and there's just no need to do that when we know. If everyone could go for school free, they wouldn't have this debt, and it would sort of free people up to pursue things on a higher level on their own. So yeah, definitely free education would be great, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Back in Vietnam, it's not free entirely, but it's relatively cheap, and so basically 100% pursue higher education.
Yeah, I think even if it wasn't totally free, it would still be a lot better. Or at least I think free public school options would be great. And then I guess private schools, they can do. It's hard to control what they do, but they would feel the pressure and also maybe made cheaper. But yeah.
So what about scholarships? So what kind of scholarships do you guys have?
So for the U.S., so I went to school. I went to UCLA, and I was in California, and I was a California resident, and that already makes it cheaper. So I think out-of-state students who went to UCLA were paying like $50,000 a year or something. So that was a lot, but I was paying like 13, or I think maybe 10 when I started, and it went up a little bit. So that's already making it cheaper. And then we fill out this thing called a FAFSA form that you sort of tell the government how much money your parents have, how much money they're making. And then based off of that, you get financial aid. So I got like Pell grants and I think Cal grants that basically covered my tuition. And then I took out some loans that covered like living costs. So, and then there are obviously like actual scholarships you can apply to, like scholarships for someone who's interested in anthropology or something. You can apply for a research grant, and you can apply like if you're a first-time person who's going to university and be like, I'm the first one in my family to do this, so there's scholarships for that, and people would apply, would write essays in college, and they would get like $3,000 for winning this and stuff like that. So it's sort of, you can sort of patch things together. I think for the more expensive universities, it's harder to patch together because it's just so much money. But yeah, so you would definitely do FAFSA, and the government, at least in the past, I don't know if it's changing now, but they would have these like funds that would help cover some of the costs.
Yeah, I have this one Norwegian friend, and you know how Norwegian are, like they're so fucking rich.
Yeah,
So
they're well taken care of. Yeah.
yeah, so he would get a loan of like 2K per month, and you would probably spend only like 600, 700 here. And by the end of his bachelor, if he finished his bachelor in time, he would get 30% subsidized.
Yeah.
So basically, everything that he bought during
Hmm.
his bachelor is 30% off, which is
Yeah, that's
crazy.
amazing. Yeah, and that helps a lot. I think that helps
Yeah,
the people who are doing it, but also just helps the country, right? Because then you get like an educated workforce that can sort of innovate from there, and it makes it easier. If everyone's just sort of like fighting just to sort of survive, then it's harder to make the advancements.
do you think those kind of things would also discourage people from actually trying? Because like, oh, if they fail, the government's gonna take care of them anyway.
I don't think it discourages people from trying, because I think people want to succeed regardless, right? And like, yeah, maybe it makes failing not feel as bad, but it also takes away, you still have to want to succeed. Like, you still want to succeed, right? Like, I think it's good to be comfortable, and then you can sort of pursue your interests and pursue for more, right? There's going to be the desire to do your best for most people. There's obviously exceptions. Some people won't want to do that, but the majority of people, I think, are interested in like self-improvement, and also like um, fulfillment, and that won't come by just being lazy and not doing your classwork and failing out.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah. So going back to SAT,
Yeah.
with what you said, there's it's pretty funny as well because now a lot of universities in Vietnam are also using the SAT to like as a metric, and
Mm.
compared to like the traditional entrance exam, you have to study way less. So for the entrance exam, you have to study at least three subjects, which is English, Vietnamese, and math. And
Hmm.
then also you have to study for three more subjects, which can be like natural science or social science.
Hmm.
And yeah, people just prefer to take the SAT. So now everyone's taking the SAT, and
Interesting.
it's also a yeah, because we're more dependent. It's usually the parents who wants the kids to take the SAT and not the kid themselves. So that's
Okay.
why they would pull up to like yeah, this one cram school with 200 people and one lectures, and then they would just not do homework. So
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
I knew someone in Bangladesh for the same similar thing, where they were, I think they were studying for entrance exams, and they basically said like these entrance exams are way more work than the SAT. Like, I have to study hours and hours every day to get through these, and the SAT was like, maybe a third as much work, maybe a fourth as much. I don't know, which was a lot less.
yeah.
Um,
So for those students who doesn't have like the desire for self fulfillment, as you say,
mhm.
would you, if that were your students, would you still like force them to, or like try to convince them to like, hey, the SAT is like the best thing ever to happen to your life, or do
Yeah,
you just like reason it out for them a bit, and maybe I don't know, like tell them to pursue what they want, maybe pursue the parents as well.
yeah. So yeah, usually most of my yeah, when I have students who are sort of not that interested in taking the SAT or like studying for it, right? I try to make it fun in some way so that it's not as miserable for them. And then I don't tell them it's the best thing ever, but I do try to show like, it's kind of fun reading the passages and learning things, because the passages, I think for the most part, when they're giving you facts, those facts are pretty accurate to the real world, and it's kind of interesting to learn it there. And then I just try to say like, this is something you have to do now so that you have this sort of freedom in the future. Because if you do it now and you study, you're going to have more options for college in the future. And if you do that, then you're going to have more options for work in the future. And just in general, this is all about like freeing yourself up in the future. And it's kind of annoying to have to put the work in now, you know, when you're 15 or 16, but it's also that in the future you can do more of what you want and sort of pursue your own interests. And it's not necessarily about making more money, but it's about, you know, having more freedom that you might not have if you just do the bare minimum. And then, you know, if you do the bare minimum on the SAT, then maybe you can only get into a couple colleges. And then if you do the bare minimum there, then you don't have that many options for jobs. And, you know, it's all like constricting you. And I think in general, for people, you want to have the ability to do a bunch of things so you can choose what you want to do. And if you feel stuck, I think that's when people feel the worst, is when they feel like I have to do this thing and I don't have any other options. So as a kid, you might have to study for the SAT, but in the long run, it really pays off.
You know, the thing is, okay, what if after all of that, they're just like, yeah, I don't care that much. I'm just here because my parents forced me to be here.
Yeah, if they do that, then it's tough. That's usually when they don't really do the homework, and that's when you spend hours and hours together. So one thing I try to tell them is like, hey, if you do the work, you'll probably have less tutoring to do. And like, if you're not doing your homework, then we're just going to spend more hours doing tutoring, and that's fine for me. I'll just do as many hours as we need to. But if you want to have more free time on your own, and that's also what I encourage too when it's like the first test. Like, I try not to put pressure on the first test because you can take it again. But it's also like if the kid isn't putting work in, I try to be like, hey, if you put the work in now and take the first test, then you won't have to take it anymore and you'll be free to do what you want after.
Yeah, that sounds really convincing.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me
Yeah.
tired every now and then.
Yeah. But for the most part, my students are usually at least somewhat motivated. I think the bigger thing isn't usually that kids will be like, I don't want to do this. They'll be sort of like, oh, I want to study. And then, oh, I forgot to do my homework. And like they're apologetic about it. So then I just have to sort of try to really make them remember, like, hey, you really need to do this. And then they'll usually do a good amount of work.
Okay. Yeah. So that was a nice conversation. If there's anyone who wants to work with you or maybe take some tutoring with you, how do they get in touch?
So they can email me at outlierlearning24@gmail.com, or they can go to outlierprep.org and fill out the form there as well, and they'll learn more about the company and the tutoring. So those are the two main forms. And then they can always go to YouTube, which is, let me see, Outlier Learning 2024. And that's the YouTube channel to watch any videos for free.
Hey, nice. Thanks for having.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for being here, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's it. Can you send me all the links you just mentioned so that I can put it in the video description?
Yeah. How many? So you said you've done one so far of these?